Chapter 20: Conservation and Forest Products. Conservation, in the view of early advocates of professional forestry and public forests, such as Bernard Fernot, meant wise use of natural resources as well as stewardship. Fernot, designated chief of the Forestry Division of the Department of Agriculture in 1886, began a research program to establish the principles upon which the forestry we advocate is to be carried on. Later, in 1907, the idea of decentralized forest experiment stations was proposed by the head of the Washington Office of Research, Raphael Zorn, with the first one constructed in Arizona in 1908. 2 years later, a unique part of the Forest Service research program was dedicated not to wise use of the forest, but to the final stage of conservation, the wise use of forest products. The Forest Service has dedicated the Forest Products Laboratory to improve utilization of wood. In 1887, Fernot started a research program on timber physics, or wood utilization, but it was ended in 1896 when the Secretary of Agriculture deemed such research not relevant to forest cultivation and protection. It may be that some members of Congress opted to curtail funding for such work out of memory of the cannonball experiments of the Forestry Division. Back in 1892, Congress had appropriated $5,000 for producing rain through cannon noise. Observers had noted that heavy rains often fell after major battles. Did loud explosions bring on rain? If they did, then cannons could be used to create rain and put an end to damaging forest fires. Fernot was reluctantly involved in these tests, which ended after windows were blown out by the sound waves of cannons firing in Alexandria, Virginia, close enough to the capital to bring an abrupt end to the experiment. In any case, upset at the lack of funding for research, Fernot left in 1898 to become dean of the Yale Forestry School. At the time Fernot began the timber physics investigation, he reached out to large wood consumers. Bulletin No. 1, published in 1887, of the USDA Forestry Division, was a report on the relations of railroads to forest supplies. To check wasteful consumption, the bulletin recommended that railroad ties and trestles be treated with preservatives to make them more durable. Wood research was still in its infancy in the United States compared to Europe. For example, use of certain species of trees to make certain products was based only on tradition here because strength tables for wood based on testing of North American samples did not exist. By the 1900s, however, some universities in the United States were beginning to investigate the properties of native wood. Filbert Roth at the University of Michigan was an early scholar working in 1888 on pines. Under Pinchot, the Forestry Division's work on timber physics resumed in 1901 through contracts with forestry schools. The goal was to promote conservation of wood through better utilization at a period when much wood was wasted during harvest and manufacture. Harold S. Betts was hired in 1902 by the Bureau of Forestry to organize the first timber testing laboratory in Washington, D.C. Betts and other pioneers in the field were engineers and not foresters, and they saw timber testing as an industrial engineering problem first and a matter of general forestry second. The concern with practical uses of research by industry led in 1904 to a Bureau of Forestry circular that offered wood users practical assistance in the study of problems related to the selection, testing, handling, seasoning, and preservation treatment of construction and other timbers and other wood products. Within the Washington office of the Forest Service, the head of a section on wood uses, McGarvey Klein, proposed a centralized permanent testing facility instead of the existing satellite system of university and agency shops. Through a cooperative agreement with the University of Wisconsin, the Forest Products Laboratory was opened in 1910 at Madison. Klein served as the first director. Wartime needs helped drive the work of the Forest Products Lab, beginning with the paper shortages of World War I that led to the development of bleached sulfate pulping. In 1931, the Forest Products Lab built the large Art Deco building that the organization still uses today. The period from World War I to the end of World War II was the tenure of Carlisle P. Winslow, or CAP, a wily administrator and Forest Products Lab legend. It was during his tenure that the laboratory accomplished two significant developments that led to the rise of the Southern pulp and paper industry: a process for manufacturing white pulp from southern pines, and a semi-chemical process for using hitherto useless hardwoods for pulp. The importance of this new paper source was that it not only helped the southern economy, but it also reduced U.S. dependence on foreign imports. For example, with the supply of Great Lakes timber rapidly being depleted, in 1923 the paper industry had imported over half of its wood fiber for pulp manufacture from Canada. Passage of the McIntyre-Stennis Act of 1962 authorized federal support for forestry and forest products research at land-grant universities. This, and increased cooperation and support by the Forest Service, increased the number and scope of universities engaged in forest products research. University research tended to be basic, while the Forest Products Lab, under greater political pressure to achieve practical results, tilted toward applied work. Research results from the Forest Products Lab form the basis for timber design standards in the United States. Environmental concerns in the 1980s found some Forest Products Lab scientists working on paper waste disposal and recycling. The Forest Products Lab continues to concentrate on its long-established mission of fostering conservation through wood utilization research.